The morning Clara Bennett stood in the banker's parlor and shattered William Hargrove's expectations was the same morning she decided her life would never belong to anyone but herself and the river that had raised her. She watched his face crumble like dried clay, his pale hands clutching the velvet box containing his grandmother's ring, and felt nothing but the pull of water running through her veins, calling her back to the cottonwoods and the endless rush of the Rio Grande that curved around her family's small ranch like a protective arm. "Miss Bennett, surely you cannot be serious, honey making," William stammered, his carefully pomaded hair gleaming in the filtered light of his father's ostentatious sitting room. "My father has offered your family considerable relief from their debts. You would want for nothing. We could move to Santa Fe, perhaps even to Denver. You would have servants, proper dresses, a life of refinement." Clara met his gaze steadily, her calloused hands folded in the faded calico of her everyday dress. She had worn her best for this meeting, but even her best was a far cry from the silk and taffeta that lined the wardrobes of the women William Hargrove should have courted. "I appreciate your offer, William, truly I do. But my answer is no. I cannot leave the river. I will not leave my home." "The river?" William's voice rose in pitch, incredulity sharpening his features. "You are refusing me because of a river? Clara, be reasonable. Your father's ranch is failing. Without this union, your family will lose everything. How can you be so selfish?" The words stung, but Clara held her ground. She thought of the dawn light dancing on water, the way the cottonwoods whispered secrets in languages older than any church sermon, the feel of cool mud between her toes when she walked the banks in summer. She thought of her mother's grave beneath the big willow, where the roots could drink deep and keep her close. "It is not selfishness to know where you belong, William. I belong to that land. I belong to that water. No amount of money or comfort could replace what I would lose." She left him standing there, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, and walked out of the grand house on the hill overlooking the town of Las Cruces. It was April of 1882, and the desert was blooming with unexpected rain. Wildflowers painted the scrubland in defiant purples and golds, and Clara breathed in the scent of creosote and possibility as she made her way down the dusty main street toward the livery where she had left her horse. She had made it halfway there when she heard the commotion at the Silver Spur Saloon. Men were shouting, and a horse was screaming, that terrible high-pitched sound that meant pain and fear. Clara picked up her skirts and ran toward the noise, her heart hammering against her ribs. A bay gelding was rearing in the street, reins tangled in a hitching post, eyes rolling white with terror. Blood streaked its shoulder where something had torn the hide, and every time it lunged backward, the rope pulled tighter, cutting into the tender skin of its muzzle. Men stood in a loose circle shouting advice but doing nothing, and Clara felt fury rise hot in her chest. "Move!" she commanded, pushing through the crowd. No one argued with her. Clara Bennett might have been small and female and poor, but everyone in Las Cruces knew she had a way with animals that bordered on uncanny. She had learned it from her father, who had learned it from the Mescalero Apache, who had taught him to listen rather than dominate. She approached the horse slowly, humming low in her throat, a sound like water over stones. The gelding's ears swiveled toward her, and though it still danced and snorted, the panic in its eyes dimmed slightly. Clara kept humming, kept moving in a slow arc that would bring her to the tangled reins without putting herself in the path of those flailing hooves. "Easy now," she murmured. "Easy, beautiful. No one is going to hurt you. Let me help." A man pushed out of the saloon doors, and Clara caught the impression of worn leather chaps, a dusty black hat, and shoulders broad enough to block the sun. "Get away from him," the man barked. "He is dangerous." "He is terrified," Clara shot back without looking away from the horse. "And if you all keep shouting, he is going to break his own neck trying to get free." She was close enough now to see the wild white rim around the gelding's dark eye, close enough to smell the salt sweat fear pouring off him. She reached out slowly, so slowly, and laid her hand against the horse's neck. The muscle beneath was quivering, tight as a bowstring, but the gelding did not bolt. Clara kept humming, kept her touch light and steady, and began to work at the tangled leather with her other hand. The man in the black hat had gone silent, and Clara was peripherally aware of him watching her, but she kept her focus on the knot. Her fingers were nimble from years of mending tack and braiding rope, and within moments she had the rein free. The gelding immediately tried to rear again, but Clara moved with him, her hand sliding up to his jaw, her voice dropping even lower, soothing and ancient and utterly confident. "There now," she whispered. "There now, brave one. You are free. You are safe." The horse blew out a long breath and lowered its head, pressing its muzzle into Clara's shoulder. She could feel the fine tremors still running through its body, but the worst of the panic had passed. She ran her hands over the gelding's legs, checking for injury, and then examined the gash on its shoulder. It was not deep, probably from a loose nail or a sharp edge of the hitching post, but it would need cleaning. "You have a gift?" Clara looked up into the face of the man in the black hat and forgot for a moment how to breathe. He was younger than she had expected, probably no more than 25 to her 21 years, with dark hair that curled against his collar and eyes the color of good whiskey in lamplight. His face was tanned and weathered, marked by sun and wind, but there was a gentleness in his expression that surprised her. Most cowboys she knew were rough men, hardened by the brutal work of cattle drives and branding, but this man looked at his horse with something like regret. "You have a wound," Clara replied, nodding toward the gelding's shoulder. "Do you have somewhere to tend to him?" The cowboy shook his head. "I just rode into town this morning. I was planning to find work at one of the ranches hereabouts, but Samson here got spooked by a snake in the alley. He bolted before I could calm him down." He paused, then extended his hand. "Name is Jack Thornton, and I am in your debt, miss." Clara wiped her dusty palm on her skirt before accepting his handshake. His grip was firm and warm, calloused in the same place as hers was, the hands of someone who worked hard and did not shy from difficulty. "Clara Bennett, and you can repay the debt by letting me clean this wound before it festers. My father's ranch is only 3 miles south, right along the river. We have medical supplies and a decent barn." Jack Thornton studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing far more than she intended to show. Then he nodded slowly. "I would appreciate that, Miss Bennett. Samson here is about the only friend I've got left in the world. I would hate to lose him to infection because of my own carelessness." They walked together out of town, Jack leading the limping gelding while Clara rode her own mare, a sturdy little pinto named Sage. The afternoon sun was climbing toward its zenith, turning the desert into a shimmering expanse of gold and amber. In the distance, the Organ Mountains rose like ancient cathedrals, their peaks still dusted with snow despite the warming season. Clara had grown up in the shadow of those mountains, had spent her childhood exploring every arroyo and canyon within riding distance, and she could not imagine a sky that did not stretch endless and turquoise from horizon to horizon. "You know your way around horses," Jack said after a while, his voice carrying easily over the crunch of their boots on the hard-packed dirt. "Where did you learn?" "My father," Clara replied. "He worked as a horse breaker before he bought the ranch. Learned from a mescalero man named Gray Wolf who understood that breaking is the wrong word for what you do with a horse. You do not break them. You earn their trust." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a wise man, your father." "He was," Clara said, and felt the familiar ache settle in her chest. "He died 2 years ago. Fever took him, and he went quick. My mother passed when I was 12. Now it is just me and my younger brother, Daniel. He is 16 and thinks he knows everything, but he's a good hand with the cattle. I am sorry for your loss." Jack's voice was quiet, sincere. "It is hard to lose family. I lost my own folks to cholera when I was 19. Been drifting ever since, picking up work where I can find it." They fell into a companionable silence after that, and Clara found herself studying Jack Thornton from the corner of her eye. He moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle, and there was something solid about him, something steady that made her think of deep roots and old trees. She shook the thought away, annoyed with herself. She had just turned down a proposal from a wealthy man's son. The last thing she needed was to start noticing the way sunlight caught in a drifting cowboy's hair. The Bennett ranch appeared like a mirage as they crested a small rise. It was not much to look at, just a low adobe house with a tin roof, a barn that leaned slightly to the west, and a series of corrals made from weathered mesquite posts. But beyond it, silver and eternal, ran the Rio Grande. Cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves just beginning to unfurl in pale green clouds, and the sound of moving water was a constant song that filled the air. Jack stopped walking and stared at the river, something shifting in his expression. "I will be damned," he murmured. "A river. A real river." Clara smiled despite herself. "Best thing about this land. Everything else might dry up and blow away, but the river keeps on. My mother used to say it was the veins of the earth carrying life wherever it went." "Your mother was a poet," Jack said, still gazing at the water with an expression that looked almost like hunger. "I have not seen a river like this since I left Texas. Most of what I've been riding through is dust and more dust." "Then you picked a good place to land," Clara said. She dismounted and gestured toward the barn. "Come on, let me get Samson cleaned up, and then I will see if we have any stew left from supper. You look like you could use a decent meal." Daniel was in the barn when they entered, mucking out stalls with the resigned expression of a teenager who would rather be anywhere else. He looked up at the sound of footsteps, and his eyes widened when he saw Jack. "Clara, who is this?" "Jack Thornton," Clara said briskly, already gathering clean rags and the bottle of carbolic solution they kept for wounds. "His horse got injured in town. I'm going to patch him up. Jack, this is my brother Daniel." Daniel set aside his pitchfork and came closer, eyeing Jack with the suspicious protectiveness of a young man who had taken his role as head of the household very seriously since their father's death. "You looking for work, mister?" Jack met the boy's gaze evenly. "I am. Know anyone who's hiring?" "We could use a hand," Daniel said slowly, glancing at Clara. "The fence line along the north pasture needs mending, and we have got about 30 head that need to be moved to summer grazing in the foothills, but we cannot pay much. Maybe room and board and a little cash when we sell the calves in the fall." Clara looked up sharply from where she was cleaning Samson's wound. "Daniel, we have not discussed this." "We need help, Clara," Daniel said flatly. "You know we do. I cannot manage all the work myself, and you have got your hands full with the garden and the chickens and keeping the house running. If Mr. Thornton here is willing to work for what we can offer, seems foolish to turn him away just because you are too proud to admit we are struggling." The words hit harder than Clara wanted to acknowledge. She knew Daniel was right. They were barely holding on, working from dawn until long past dark and still falling behind on the essential maintenance that kept a ranch functional. But taking on a hired hand meant trusting someone, letting someone into their small, fragile world. And Clara had learned that trust was a dangerous thing to give freely. She looked at Jack, who was watching her with those amber eyes, patient and undemanding. "Why would you want to work for a room and board when you could probably find better paying work at one of the bigger spreads?" Jack shrugged. "Bigger spreads mean more people, more politics. I am not much for politics. And besides," he glanced toward the open barn door where the river glinted through the cottonwoods, "I have always worked better near water. Something about it settles me. If you have got a river and honest work, that is about all I need." Clara felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening that she had not realized was closed. She finished bandaging Samson's shoulder and stood wiping her hands on her apron. "All right, you can stay. But we will see how it goes. If the work does not suit you, or if you do not suit the work, no hard feelings when you move on. Agreed?" Jack's face broke into a smile that transformed him, lighting up his features and crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Agreed, Miss Bennett. You will not regret this." But as Clara led him toward the house to show him the small room off the kitchen where hired hands had stayed in better years, She wondered if perhaps she already did regret it, not because she doubted his ability to work, but because of the way her heart had jumped when he smiled, and the way she kept finding excuses to glance at his hands, his shoulders, the line of his jaw. She had told William Hargrove she would not leave the river for anything. She had not considered what might happen if someone came to her instead. The first week Jack Thornton spent on the Bennett ranch passed in a blur of hard work and careful distance. He proved himself capable, and then some, rising before dawn to help Daniel with the morning chores, mending fence until his hands bled, and moving the cattle to their summer pasture with a patience and skill that spoke of years in the saddle. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye as she went about her own work, noting the way he gentled the calves when they balked, the way he always checked on Samson before seeing to his own needs, the way he sometimes stood at the edge of the river in the evening just looking at the water as though it were a miracle. They spoke little during those first days, their conversations limited to practical matters of ranch work and meals. But Clara was aware of him in a way that made her uncomfortable, attuned to his presence even when he was out of sight. She found herself listening for his footsteps, watching for his silhouette against the setting sun, and she hated the weakness of it even as she could not seem to stop. It was Daniel who finally broke through the careful politeness. One evening at supper, after they had finished a meal of beans and cornbread, Daniel leaned back in his chair and fixed Jack with a curious look. "So where are you from originally, Jack? You have got a bit of an accent that does not quite sound like New Mexico." Jack smiled slightly, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. "Born in East Texas, little town called Jefferson. Grew up on the Cypress Bayou, which is about as different from this country as you can imagine. All green and wet, trees so thick you could barely see the sky. But my folks got restless, decided to try their luck further west. We made it as far as Fort Worth before the cholera hit." He paused, staring into his coffee. "After they died, I just kept moving, worked cattle drives, tried my hand at breaking horses, spent a season as a deputy in a town so small it did not even have a name. Never found a place that felt right to stop." "Until now?" Clara asked quietly. Jack looked up at her, and something passed between them, a current as real as the one running through the river outside. "Maybe. Too soon to say for certain, but this feels different. Good different." Daniel, oblivious to the sudden tension in the room, grinned. "Well, you picked the right time to show up. Another month, and we would have been drowning in work. As it is, we are just mostly drowning." He stood and stretched. "I'm going to check on the horses one more time before bed. Clara, you need anything before I go?" Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice. Daniel clomped out, leaving her alone with Jack in the warm circle of lamplight. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with things unspoken. "Your brother is a good kid," Jack said finally. "You have done well with him, especially after losing your folks so young." "He has done well with himself," Clara replied. "I cannot take credit for his character. That was already there." "You are too modest." Jack stood and carried his cup to the wash basin, moving with the casual ease of someone who was accustomed to pulling his own weight. "He looks to you for everything. The way he watches to see your reaction before he makes a decision. The way he works himself half to death trying to make you proud. That kind of devotion does not come from nowhere." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself clearing the table. "We take care of each other. That is what family does." Jack was quiet for a moment, and when Clara glanced at him, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Can I ask you something, Clara?" She set down the plates and nodded warily. "In town that first day I heard some men talking after you left. They said you had just turned down a proposal from William Hargrove, the banker's son. They said you could have had an easy life, money, security. They said you were a fool." He paused. "Were you? A fool, I mean?" Clara bristled immediately. "That is none of your concern." "You are right. It is not." Jack held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I am not trying to pry. I am just trying to understand. Because from where I stand, turning down security when you have got a failing ranch and a younger brother to support seems either very brave or very foolish. And I am trying to figure out which." Clara crossed her arms over her chest, defensive and furious and something else she did not want to name. I turned him down because I do not love him, because marrying him would have meant leaving this place, leaving the river, and I cannot do that. I will not do that. Call me foolish if you want, everyone else does. I do not think you are foolish, Jack said quietly. I think you are loyal. To this land, to your family, to yourself. There is honor in that. The anger drained out of Clara as quickly as it had risen, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. William called me selfish. He said I was choosing dirt and water over my family's welfare. And what do you say? Clara looked past Jack, through the small window that framed a view of the river silver in the rising moonlight. I say that some things matter more than money. I say that my mother is buried under the willow by the water, and my father's ashes are scattered in the current, and I can feel them here, still. I say that this river has been flowing for thousands of years and will keep flowing long after we are all dust. And being part of that, being connected to something so much bigger and older than myself, that matters. William could never understand that. He sees the river as an obstacle to development, a resource to be exploited. But to me, it is everything. Jack moved closer, and Clara could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. Then you made the right choice. A life lived against your own nature is no life at all. Clara met his gaze and felt something shift inside her, like tectonic plates settling into a new configuration. You understand that, do not you? That is why you have been drifting. You have been looking for a place that fits. Maybe, Jack admitted. Or maybe I have been running from having to make that kind of choice. Easier to keep moving than to risk putting down roots in the wrong soil. And now? Jack smiled, slow and genuine. Now I am beginning to think I might have found the right soil. But it is early yet. We will see. He said goodnight and retreated to his small room, leaving Clara standing in the kitchen with her heart beating too fast and her mind racing with possibilities she had no business entertaining. She had known this man for barely a week. She had just turned down a proposal from someone she had known her entire life. She could not afford to let her heart lead her into foolishness. But as she lay in bed that night listening to the river's song through her open window, she could not stop thinking about the way Jack had looked at the water like he was seeing something holy, and the way he had defended her choice without hesitation, without judgment. She could not stop thinking about the gentle strength in his hands and the loneliness she had glimpsed behind his easy smile. The river ran on, indifferent and eternal, and Clara fell asleep, wondering if perhaps the current had brought Jack Thornton to her door for a reason she was only beginning to understand. The following Sunday, Clara decided to take advantage of the rare free morning to ride to the widow Martinez's homestead, about 5 miles upstream. Esperanza Martinez was a tiny, fierce woman in her 70s who had outlived 2 husbands and raised 6 children on sheer determination and spite. She was also the closest thing Clara had to a mother figure, and Clara tried to visit at least once a month. Jack was repairing the chicken coop when Clara saddled Sage, and he looked up from his work with a questioning expression. Heading somewhere? Visiting a friend, Clara replied, checking her saddle cinch. I will be back by early afternoon. Daniel knows where I'm going if anything comes up. Jack nodded and returned to his hammering, but Clara caught the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. She almost invited him along, then thought better of it. She needed space from him, distance to clear her head and remember her priorities. Spending more time in his company would only make things more complicated. The ride to Esperanza's place took Clara along the river road, and she let Sage pick her own pace, content to watch the water and the greening landscape. Spring was Clara's favorite season in the desert. That brief window when the harshness softened and everything bloomed with defiant beauty. Prickly pear cactuses wore crowns of yellow flowers, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. Esperanza was in her garden when Clara arrived, bent over a bed of chile peppers with a weeding knife in her gnarled hand. She straightened when she heard Sage's hoofbeats and shaded her eyes against the sun. "Clara, mija, you look troubled," Esperanza said by way of greeting, her Spanish accent still thick despite 50 years in New Mexico. "Come, sit. Tell Esperanza what has got you so twisted up." Clara dismounted and tied Sage to the porch rail, accepting the glass of cool water Esperanza pressed into her hand. They sat together in the shade of the ramada, surrounded by strings of drying red chiles and the drowsy buzz of bees. "I hired a man to help with the ranch," Clara said without preamble. "His name is Jack Thornton. He is a good worker, honest, kind to the animals. Daniel likes him." "But?" Esperanza prompted, her dark eyes shrewd. "But I cannot stop thinking about him," Clara admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "And it is foolish. I barely know him, and I just turned down William Hargrove, and the whole town thinks I'm crazy. And the last thing I need is to complicate matters by developing feelings for a drifting cowboy who will probably be gone before the summer is out." Esperanza was quiet for a long moment, sipping her water and watching a hummingbird dart between the hollyhocks. "Did I ever tell you about my first husband, Clara? Miguel's father?" Clara shook her head. "I was 17 when I met him. He came through my father's village with a herd of sheep, heading north to the summer pastures. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and a smile that could light up the whole sky. My father forbade me to speak to him, said he was trouble, said he would never amount to anything. But I did not care. I knew right here," Esperanza pressed her fist to her heart, "that he was mine and I was his. So I married him anyway, and my father disowned me, and we spent 30 years scratching a living from this hard land. We were poor, Clara, so poor that some winters we ate nothing but beans and tortillas for months. But I have never regretted it, not for one single day." "What are you saying?" Clara asked. "I am saying that the heart knows things the head cannot reason out. I am saying that security and wealth are cold comfort when you are lying next to someone you do not love. And I am saying that sometimes the right person shows up when you are least expecting them, and the only foolishness is in being too afraid to see what might be possible." Esperanza reached over and patted Clara's knee. "This Jack, does he look at you the way you look at him?" Clara felt heat creep up her neck. "I do not know. Maybe. It is hard to tell." Esperanza cackled, the sound bright and knowing. "Oh, you know. You are just scared to admit it. Give him time, mija. Give yourself time. If it is real, it will become clear. And if it is not, then he will move on, and you will have lost nothing but a few months of wondering." They talked of other things after that, the health of Esperanza's grandchildren and the prospects for the summer crops. But Clara's mind kept returning to Jack. The way he hummed while he worked, low and tuneless, almost unconscious. The way he always made sure Clara and Daniel ate before he filled his own plate. The way he had looked at her the night before, when she had talked about the river, like she was saying something profound instead of simply speaking her truth. The ride home was slower, Clara's thoughts tangled and uncertain. She was still sorting through her conversation with Esperanza when she crested the rise above the ranch and saw smoke. For one terrible moment, her heart stopped. Visions of fire consuming the barn, the house, everything they had worked so hard to maintain. Then she realized the smoke was coming from a controlled fire near the river, and relief flooded through her so forcefully she felt dizzy. Jack and Daniel were standing beside the fire pit, and as Clara rode closer, she saw they had rigged a crude spit over the flames and were roasting something that smelled absolutely divine. Sage caught the scent too and picked up her pace, eager for her own supper. "What is this?" Clara called as she dismounted. Daniel grinned, his face smudged with soot. "Jack shot a wild turkey this morning. We figured we would roast it up proper, maybe celebrate the fact that we finished moving the herd without losing a single calf." Jack looked up from where he was turning the spit, and his smile was warm and uncomplicated. "Hope you are hungry, Clara. This bird is big enough to feed an army." They ate as the sun sank toward the mountains, tearing into the succulent meat with their fingers, grease dripping down their chins. Daniel regaled them with an embellished account of a snake he had encountered near the north pasture, And Jack countered with a story about a cattle drive he had worked in Texas where the cook had accidentally seasoned the beans with ground coffee instead of chili powder. Clara laughed until her sides hurt, the tension of the day dissolving in the easy camaraderie of the meal. When Daniel finally excused himself to bed, yawning and replete, Clara and Jack remained by the dying fire. The stars were coming out, hard and bright in the vast desert sky, and the river sang its endless song just beyond the cottonwoods. "Thank you for this," Clara said quietly. "It has been a long time since we had something to celebrate." "It has been a long time since I had people worth celebrating with," Jack replied. He poked at the embers with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "Can I ask you something?" Clara's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "That day in town, when you turned down Hargrove, did you hesitate at all, even for a moment?" Clara considered lying, then decided he deserved honesty. "For about 5 seconds, I thought about my mother's medical bills that we never quite finished paying off, and the hole in the barn roof that we keep meaning to fix but never have the money for, and the fact that Daniel should be thinking about courting and marriage but cannot because we barely have enough to feed ourselves, let alone a wife. I thought about how easy it would be to just say yes to let someone else shoulder the burden for a while. And then I thought about waking up every morning next to someone who saw the river as just another line on a surveyor's map, and I knew I would rather starve." Clara looked at Jack, found him already watching her. "Have you ever wanted something so badly that it scared you?" Jack was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Then he set down his stick and turned to face her fully. "Yes, I am wanting something like that right now, and it terrifies me." Clara's breath caught. "Jack, I know," he said quickly. "I know this is too fast, too soon. I know I'm just a hired hand who showed up less than 2 weeks ago. I know you have every reason not to trust me or believe me. But Clara, from the moment you walked up to that terrified horse in the middle of the street, from the moment you put your hand on his neck and gentled him with nothing but your voice and your absolute fearlessness, I have not been able to stop thinking about you, and then you brought me here, to this place, to this river, and it felt like coming home in a way I have never experienced before." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. "What are you saying?" Jack reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face in his calloused palm, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "I am saying that I think I am falling in love with you, Clara Bennett. I am saying that I know it is too soon and too reckless. And I'm saying it anyway because I have spent my whole life running from things that scared me, and I'm tired of running. If you tell me to go, I will. If you tell me this is impossible, I will respect that. But if there is any chance at all that you might feel even a fraction of what I am feeling, then I'm asking you to give me time to prove that I am worth the risk." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had cried exactly 3 times since her father died, once at his funeral, once when the bank had threatened foreclosure, and once in the middle of the night when the weight of responsibility had crushed down on her so hard she could not breathe. She did not cry for happiness or hope or the terrifying vulnerability of being seen, but here, with Jack's hand warm against her skin and his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare and infinitely precious, the tears came anyway. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am so scared, Jack. I cannot afford to be wrong about this. I cannot afford to let someone in who is going to leave." "Then let me prove I am not leaving," Jack said. "Let me prove that I see what you see in this place, in this river, in this life you have built. Let me prove that I want to build it with you." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the tears slip down her cheeks, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Then she thought about Esperanza's words, about the heart knowing things the head could not reason out, and she thought about the way Jack had understood instantly and completely why she could not leave the river. She thought about the way he treated Daniel with respect instead of condescension, the way he worked himself to exhaustion without complaint, the way he stood at the water's edge like a pilgrim at a shrine. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "All right, we will try. We will see where this goes. But Jack, I need you to understand something. This ranch, this river, this is my life. I will not give it up for anyone. If we do this, if we build something together, it has to be here. It has to include this place." "I would not want it any other way," Jack said, and then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. But when Clara leaned into him, when she fisted her hands in his shirt and kissed him back with all the longing and fear and desperate hope she had been bottling up, the gentleness gave way to something deeper, something that tasted like promise and felt like falling and rising all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this." "You better," Clara said. But she was smiling, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the fear was smaller than the hope. The next few months passed in a haze of hard work and slow building intimacy. Jack threw himself into improving the ranch with a dedication that went beyond obligation. He patched the barn roof, reinforced the corrals, and spent long hours helping Daniel repair the irrigation ditches that brought river water to the small fields where they grew hay for winter feed. Clara watched him work and felt her initial trust deepen into something more solid, more enduring. They stole moments together when they could. Jack taught Clara to fish using techniques he had learned as a boy in Texas, and Clara taught Jack the constellations her father had shown her, the ones the Mescalero people used to navigate the desert night. They walked along the river in the evenings after the work was done, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes simply existing in companionable silence. It was during one of those walks in early July when the heat was at its most oppressive and the river was a ribbon of salvation through the parched landscape that Jack told Clara about his dream. "I have been thinking," he said, skipping a stone across the water, "about what it would take to make this place really thrive. Not just survive, but thrive." Clara raised an eyebrow. "And what brilliant plan have you concocted?" Jack grinned at her teasing tone. "Horses. Not just a few for working the cattle, but breeding quality horses. You have got the water, the grazing, the knowledge. With the right stallion and a few good mares, we could build a reputation. People would come from all over New Mexico territory to buy Bennett horses." Clara felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. Dangerous and intoxicating. "That would take money we do not have. A good stallion could cost $200 or more." "I have been saving," Jack said quietly. "Every dollar I have made since I was 19, just putting it away without any real plan for what to do with it. I have got about $300 put by. It is yours if you want it, if you will let me invest in this place, in our future." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "Jack, that is your money, your security. I cannot ask you to risk it on a dream." "You are not asking, I am offering." Jack took her hands, his expression serious. "Clara, I meant what I said. I want to build a life here, with you. That means putting my money where my mouth is. Besides, it is not just a dream. You are the best hand with horses I have ever seen. If anyone can make this work, it is you." Clara looked into his eyes and saw nothing but absolute conviction. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows of her heart, but it was quieter now, drowned out by the growing certainty that Jack Thornton was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man, a hard worker, and someone who saw her not as a burden or a prize, but as a partner. "All right," she said, "we will do it. But we do it smart. We research, we plan, we do not jump into anything without thinking it through." Jack's answering smile was bright enough to rival the sun. He picked Clara up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, and when he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left her breathless and wanting. "I love you," he said against her lips. "God, Clara, I love you so much it feels like my chest might crack open from it." I love you too, Clara replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She had not been looking for love. She had turned it away when it came wrapped in money and social standing. But here, with her feet in the mud and the river singing beside them, with a man who understood her need for roots and wildness in equal measure, love had found her anyway. They spent the rest of the summer planning and preparing. Jack traveled to ranches throughout the territory, looking at stallions and asking questions, learning everything he could about bloodlines and conformation. Clara worked on improving their existing facilities, building stalls that would accommodate breeding stock, and researching the market for quality horses. Daniel, who had initially been skeptical of Jack's intentions toward his sister, became one of their staunchest supporters. He could see the way Clara had come alive again, the way the constant tension she had carried since their father's death had eased, replaced by a cautious optimism that made her look younger, lighter. In August, Jack returned from a trip to Santa Fe with news. "I found him," he announced, barely containing his excitement. "The perfect stallion. His name is River King, and he is a 4-year-old quarter horse out of some of the best bloodlines in Texas. The owner is willing to sell for $250. "That is most of your savings, Weimwarina," Clara said, worry creasing her forehead. "It is an investment in our future," Jack countered. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Trust me on this, Clara. I have a good feeling about it." They bought River King in September, and Clara fell in love with the stallion the moment she saw him. He was a magnificent animal, steel gray with black points and an intelligent eye that reminded her of Jack's gaze. Watchful, thoughtful, kind. He settled into the ranch as though he had always belonged there, and within a month, Clara had him gentled enough to work. It was late October, with the cottonwoods turning gold and the air finally cooling from the brutal summer heat, when Jack asked Clara to marry him. They were sitting by the river watching the sunset fire to the western sky, and he simply took her hand and said, "Marry me, Clara. Make this official. Make this forever." Clara looked at him, at the man who had ridden into her life on an injured horse and stayed to build a future, and felt the last of her fear dissolve like morning mist. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Jack, I will marry you." They were wed in November in a simple ceremony beside the river, with Daniel standing as best man and Esperanza weeping joyful tears. The local priest, Father Gonzalez, performed the service, and half the county turned out for the celebration that followed. Even William Hargrove came, though he left early, his expression carefully neutral. The night of their wedding, Jack carried Clara over the threshold of the adobe house and into the room they would now share. He set her down gently, his hands shaking slightly, and Clara realized with a rush of tenderness that he was nervous. "I have never done this before," he admitted. "Been with a woman, I mean. I wanted to wait until it meant something." Clara took his face in her hands and kissed him softly. "Neither have I. We will figure it out together." And they did, with patience and laughter and a growing passion that left them both trembling and amazed. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets with the sound of the river drifting through the window, Jack traced patterns on Clara's bare shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for trusting me." "Thank you for seeing me," Clara replied, "for understanding what I needed and being brave enough to stay." The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Clara had never been so happy, had never imagined that happiness was something she was allowed to claim. She and Jack worked side by side every day, and every night they fell into bed exhausted and satisfied, wrapped around each other like they could hold off the entire world through sheer determination. In March, Clara realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be certain, then pulled Esperanza aside during a visit and asked the older woman's advice. "Mija, you are pregnant," Esperanza said, her eyes crinkling with delight. "I can see it in your face. You have that glow." Clara pressed her hand to her belly, feeling nothing yet but knowing somehow that Esperanza was right. "I have not told Jack yet. I wanted to be sure." "He will be over the moon," Esperanza assured her. That man loves you like you are the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one. A baby will only make him love you more. Clara told Jack that evening after Daniel had gone to bed. She simply took his hand and placed it on her stomach and said, "We are going to have a baby." Jack's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and then pure, incandescent joy so quickly that Clara laughed. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "As certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it. But Esperanza thinks so, and she has birthed half the babies in this county. She knows the signs." Jack dropped to his knees in front of Clara and pressed his face against her belly, his shoulders shaking. When he looked up, there were tears streaming down his face. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be a family." "We already are a family," Clara said gently, running her fingers through his hair. "But yes, we are going to grow." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Clara worked as long as her body would allow, stubbornly refusing to be treated as fragile, and Jack hovered like an anxious shadow, trying to take on her chores without being too obvious about it. Daniel was going to be an uncle, and he swung wildly between excitement and existential terror at the responsibility. Their horse breeding program was beginning to show promise. River King had covered 6 mares that spring, and the resulting foals would be born the following year. Word had spread about Clara's skill with horses, and people were already inquiring about purchasing foals, sight unseen, based on reputation alone. In late November, with the cottonwoods bare and the river running cold and clear, Clara went into labor. It was a difficult birth, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Jack feared he would lose her. But Clara was as stubborn about childbirth as she was about everything else. And as dawn broke over the Oregon mountains, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, their son entered the world with a furious cry. They named him Samuel, after Jack's father, and he was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and howling, but perfect. Jack held his son for the first time and wept, pressing kisses to Clara's sweaty forehead and whispering thank you over and over like a prayer. Daniel was smitten from the first moment, constantly hovering over the baby, eager to help with anything Clara needed. "I am going to teach him to ride," Daniel declared, "and to rope cattle, and to fish in the river." "He has to learn to hold his head up first," Clara said, amused and exhausted, and more content than she had ever imagined possible. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The horse breeding operation grew slowly but steadily, and the Bennett name became synonymous with quality stock. Jack proved to have a gift for training as well as breeding, and together he and Clara developed a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as Colorado and Arizona. Daniel eventually married a sweet girl named Maria from a neighboring ranch, and they built a small house on the edge of the Bennett property, close enough to help with the work, but far enough to have their own space. They gave Clara and Jack 3 nieces in quick succession, and Samuel grew up surrounded by family and love and the constant song of the river. When Samuel was 4, Clara gave birth to twin daughters, Anna and Rose, who inherited their mother's stubborn independence and their father's easy charm. The house was loud and chaotic and filled with laughter, and Jack would sometimes catch Clara's eye across the dinner table and mouth, "I love you," just to see her smile. Life was not without its difficulties. There were years when the river ran low and they worried about water for the stock. There were seasons when the horse market was depressed and money was tight. There were the inevitable injuries and illnesses that came with ranch life, the broken bones and close calls and heartbreak of losing animals they had raised from birth. But through it all, Clara and Jack faced everything together. They had built something real and lasting, not just in the ranch itself, but in the life they had created, the family they had grown, the love that had started as a spark beside a terrified horse in a dusty street, and had grown into a flame that nothing could extinguish. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Clara back to the spot by the river where he had first told her he loved her. The cottonwoods were gold with autumn, and the water ran silver in the afternoon light just as it had on that long-ago day. Do you remember what you told me that night? Jack asked, pulling Clara into his arms. You said you could not afford to be wrong about me. You said you could not afford to let someone in who was going to leave. I remember, Clara said, leaning into his warmth. I was terrified. Do you still think you were wrong? Jack asked. Just, do you ever regret taking the risk? Clara looked up at him, at the face she knew better than her own, the hands that had held hers through labor and loss and joy, the eyes that still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She thought about Samuel and Anna and Rose, about the horses grazing in the pastures they had built together, about the laughter that filled their house and the life they had forged from hope and hard work. Not for a single second, she said firmly. You were worth the risk. This was all worth the risk. Jack kissed her then, soft and sweet, and the river sang its approval, eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to their love. Years continued to pass, and the Bennett Thornton Ranch became a fixture of the Las Cruces community. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's gift for horses and his father's steady temperament. He eventually took over much of the day-to-day operations, allowing Jack and Clara to slow down slightly as they entered their 40s. Anna and Rose were inseparable, two halves of a whole, and they scandalized the county by declaring they wanted to be horse trainers like their mother rather than finding husbands. Clara supported them wholeheartedly, much to the chagrin of the more traditional families in the area. Daniel and Maria's family continued to grow, and their oldest daughter showed such promise with horses that Clara began training her seriously, envisioning a future where the ranch would employ multiple generations of family. But it was not all smooth sailing. In 1895, when Samuel was 13 and the twins were 9, the Rio Grande flooded spectacularly, the worst flooding anyone could remember in 50 years. The river that Clara loved so dearly turned from salvation to threat, swallowing pastures and corrals, threatening the barn, and even the house itself. Jack and Daniel and half the county worked around the clock to move the horses to higher ground and shore up defenses against the rising water. Clara, pregnant with their 4th child, directed operations from the porch, refusing to leave despite Jack's pleas for her to take the children and shelter at Esperanza's house, which sat on a hill well above the floodplain. I did not stay here, through everything else, just to abandon the ranch now, Clara said flatly. We will protect what is ours. In the end, they lost some fencing and one of the older outbuildings, but the house and barn survived intact. When the water finally receded, leaving behind a thick layer of silt that would make the fields incredibly fertile, Jack found Clara standing at the edge of the river, one hand on her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face. I thought it would take everything, she whispered when he came to stand beside her. I thought the thing I loved most was going to destroy everything we built. Jack wrapped his arms around her from behind, cradling her against his chest, but it did not. We protected what mattered. And look, the river gave back too. He gestured to the enriched soil, already sprouting green with new growth. It takes, but it also gives. That is the bargain we made when we chose to build here. Clara leaned back against him, watching the river flow past, already returning to its normal boundaries, as though the flood had been nothing but a bad dream. I am not sure I could survive losing you, she said quietly, or the children, the ranch, the horses, even the river. I think I could survive losing all of that, but not you. You will not have to, Jack promised. I am not going anywhere. We are going to grow old together right here, listening to this river until we are too deaf to hear it anymore, and then our grandchildren will listen for us. Their 4th child, a son they named Thomas, was born 2 months later, healthy and loud and demanding. Clara was 42, and the birth was harder than the previous ones, leaving her weak and pale for weeks afterward. Jack barely left her side, caring for the baby, and running the household with the help of Maria and the older children. You need to rest, he told Clara firmly when she tried to get up to check on the horses just a week after giving birth. The horses will survive without you for a few more days. Your body needs time to heal. I hate being idle, Clara complained, but she let him tuck her back into bed. It makes me feel useless. You are growing a human being and recovering from bringing him into the world. That is the opposite of useless. Jack sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Let me take care of you for once. You have been taking care of everyone else for so long. Let me return the favor. Watching him with baby Thomas, seeing the gentle competence with which he handled their infant son, Clara fell in love with Jack all over again. He had always been a devoted father, but there was something about seeing him at 45, silver threading through his dark hair and lines of experience marking his face, cradling their youngest child with the same tenderness he had shown their firstborn, that moved her beyond words. I picked the right man, she said softly. Jack looked up from the baby and smiled. No, I am the one who got lucky. I was just a drifting cowboy with nothing to my name, and you saw something worth keeping. You gave me a home, Clara. You gave me everything. By the time Thomas was 5, the ranch had expanded to nearly 300 acres, and they employed 2 full-time hands in addition to family. The Bennett Thornton horses were sought after throughout the Southwest, and they could barely keep up with demand. Clara and Jack had built exactly what they had dreamed of all those years ago, a thriving business rooted in the land they loved and sustained by the river that had brought them together. Samuel married at 24, choosing a strong-minded young woman named Catherine, who was not afraid of hard work and who shared the family's love for horses. They moved into the foreman's house that Jack and Daniel had built, and Catherine announced her pregnancy just 6 months after the wedding. We are going to be grandparents, Eastborough, Jack said to Clara one night, the wonder evident in his voice. When did we get old enough to be grandparents? Clara laughed and snuggled closer to him in their bed. I have no idea, but apparently it has happened. How does it feel? Terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, Jack admitted, just like everything else with this family. The grandchildren came steadily after that. Samuel and Catherine had 4 children in rapid succession. Anna eventually did marry, choosing a quiet rancher from up north who respected her independence and her career. Rose never married but became one of the most sought-after horse trainers in New Mexico Territory, eventually opening her own operation 50 miles north with her parents' blessing and financial support. Daniel and Maria ended up with 6 children total, all of whom were woven into the fabric of the ranch operations. Even Thomas, the baby, grew into a capable horseman with a gift for veterinary work that would eventually take him to a formal education back east, though he always returned home to the river. Jack and Clara grew older together, their bodies wearing the marks of hard physical labor, their faces lined by sun and wind and laughter. But they were happy, deeply and contentedly happy in a way that never required words. They would walk along the river in the evenings, just as they had when they were young, except now they moved more slowly, Jack's hand steady on Clara's elbow when the path was rough. Clara's fingers linked through his with the ease of 40 years of practice. It was on one such walk in the spring of 1920, when Clara was 64 and Jack was 68, that Clara stopped suddenly and pressed her hand to her chest. Clara? Jack's voice was sharp with concern. What is wrong? Nothing is wrong, Clara said, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was just thinking about how perfect this moment is. The river, the sunset, you beside me, all our children and grandchildren healthy and happy, the ranch thriving. I have lived a good life, Jack. Better than I ever imagined possible. Jack's throat tightened. You are talking like you are saying goodbye. Not yet, Clara assured him, reaching up to cup his weathered cheek. But someday, and when that day comes, I want you to know that I have never regretted a single moment. Not the hard times or the scary times or the times when we had no idea if we would make it through. You made my life extraordinary, Jack Thornton. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he could keep time itself at bay through sheer force of will. You are the love of my life, Clara, the only love of my life. Everything good I am, everything I have become, is because you believed in me when I was nobody, because you let me stay. They stood there until the sun had fully set, and the stars were emerging in the vast New Mexico sky. Two people who had built a life from nothing but love and stubborn determination, bound together by choice, and sustained by the eternal song of the river. Clara lived another 6 years, long enough to see her oldest grandchild married and to hold her first great-grandchild, a squalling baby girl with dark hair and amber eyes who looked remarkably like Jack. She passed quietly in her sleep one cool October morning, with Jack sleeping beside her and the river whispering through the open window. Jack was shattered by her loss, the grief hollowing him out in ways he had not anticipated, even though he had known it was coming. But he did not fall apart, not completely, because he had made her a promise decades ago that he would take care of the life they had built together, and Jack Thornton had never broken a promise to his wife. He lived another 3 years, throwing himself into the ranch work despite his age, teaching his grandchildren everything Clara had taught him about horses and patience, and listening to what the land needed. He walked to the river every evening, sometimes talking to Clara as though she were still beside him, sometimes simply standing in silence, remembering. On a warm spring evening in 1929, Jack went down to the river at sunset, as he always did. Samuel found him there an hour later, sitting with his back against the big willow where Clara's mother was buried, his face peaceful, his hands stretched out toward the water as though reaching for something only he could see. They buried him beside Clara on a small rise overlooking the river, with a simple stone marker that read, "Jack and Clara Thornton, together forever." The entire county turned out for the funeral, and the stories people told of Jack's kindness and Clara's fierce wisdom, of the love they had shared and the legacy they had built, filled ours. Samuel stood with his siblings and his own children and grandchildren, looking out over the ranch his parents had carved from hope and hard work, and felt the weight of their legacy settle on his shoulders. But it did not feel like a burden. It felt like a gift, like roots running deep into good soil, sustained by the eternal flow of water and the memory of a love that had transformed everything it touched. The river ran on, as it always had and always would, carrying the story of the woman who had turned down the banker's son to stay near its banks, and the cowboy who had realized the river was nearby and understood in that moment that he had finally found his home. It carried their story downstream, mixing with all the other stories of all the other lives lived along its course, becoming part of something larger and older and infinitely more enduring than any single human existence. But their love, their specific, beautiful love, had left its mark on the land and the people they had touched, and that mark would not fade. It would live on in the horses that still carried the Bennett Thornton name, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who still worked the ranch and walked the river path, in the stories told on warm evenings when the family gathered, and in the understanding passed down through generations that sometimes the right person arrives exactly when you need them, and the only question is whether you are brave enough to let them stay. The ranch continued to thrive long after Jack and Clara were gone, operated by their descendants, each generation adding its own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation that had been laid by two people who had chosen love and land and each other over ease and security. The river was protected, kept wild and free by the family that understood its value in ways that could not be measured in dollars. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right and the cottonwoods whispered in the breeze, people swore they could see two figures walking along the riverbank, hand in hand, forever young, forever in love, forever home. The Bennett Thornton legacy became legendary not just in Las Cruces but throughout New Mexico, a testament to what could be built when two people committed fully to each other and to the land they loved. Samuel's grandson eventually wrote a book about his great-grandparents based on the extensive journals Clara had kept and the stories that had been passed down through the family. The book, titled River People, became a regional bestseller, introducing Jack and Clara's story to a whole new generation. But for those who had known them, who had experienced their warmth and witnessed their partnership firsthand, No book could fully capture the magic of what they had shared. It was something that had to be lived to be understood, that bone-deep certainty that you had found your person and your place, and that everything else was just details to be worked out along the way. The river continued its eternal flow, indifferent to human drama and human love, but somehow sanctifying it all the same, bearing witness to the truth that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to stay exactly where you are, to refuse the easy path, and to trust that the right person will find their way to you. Clara had stayed for the river, and the river had brought her Jack. It was a simple story, really, but in its simplicity lay a truth that resonated across generations. Love is not about grand gestures or perfect timing, but about showing up, staying present, and choosing each other over and over again, through floods and droughts and all the ordinary days in between. And so the story ended where it began, with the river running silver through the desert, with the cottonwood standing sentinel, with the land remembering every footstep and every whispered promise, holding it all close like a secret too precious to share but too beautiful to keep completely hidden. The river remembered Clara's determination and Jack's devotion, and in its remembering it kept them alive. Two souls who had loved each other and their home with equal ferocity, and who had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are the ones rooted in the most ordinary soil, nourished by hard work and watered by tears and sustained by the simple, radical act of staying.